A new study shows that low carbohydrate, high protein diets lower testosterone levels in men. Is this something all men need to be concerned about? Let's get into the details. I'm Dr. Brett Scher, the medical director at DietDoctor.com, and catchy headlines like this are concerning, right? No man wants lower testosterone levels. So if a certain diet lowers your testosterone level, that automatically kind of lights up the danger signals in your brain to say, boy, maybe I shouldn't be eating this diet. But yet we know there are a lot of potential benefits to eating low-carb, high-protein diets. They've been associated with better weight loss. They've been associated with better body composition, with lean mass and losing fat mass, with decreased hunger and increased satiety. Lots of potential benefits. So is this enough to sort of outweigh that or something to be concerned about? I think the details matter, so let's talk about them. You know I love to talk about details. So the study is called Low Carbohydrate Diets and Men's Cortisol and Testosterone. Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis, published in Nutrition and Health. Now, it's a systematic review of other studies, both randomized and non-randomized, that were intervention studies looking at low-carb diets defined as 35% of your calories from carbohydrates. So not ketogenic diets, not even really liberal low-carb diets, more of this general definition, less than 35% of your calories from carbs. So, probably somewhere in the 150 grams or less range, which take that for what it's worth. And they also looked at separating high protein, which they defined as 35% of calories, and normal protein diets. Now, what's interestingly here is that they included a total of 27 studies with a whopping 309 people. So it kind of shows you each of these studies were very small studies. They have 27 studies and 309 people. That's like barely over 10 people per study. So pretty small studies, very small sample size that we're dealing with. Now, part of the background, though, that they talk about in their introduction was there was a 2021 study that showed low-carb diets can increase total testosterone, but that was confounded by 5.7 kilograms of weight loss. So losing fat mass helps increase testosterone. So one of their questions was, is it the low carb or was it the weight loss? And what is the true low carb effect on testosterone? And also there's a question of, do carbs attenuate a post-exercise rise in cortisol? So cortisol has the reputation of being sort of like a bad hormone because it's involved with chronic stress and inflammation and can contribute, or at least is associated with, insulin resistance. And that goes up with exercise, but there are some studies showing that eating carbs before exercise can help lower that cortisol rise. So will a low carbohydrate diet then also increase cortisol? So that's what this study was looking at, testosterone and cortisol. We talked about the definitions. And so let's talk about cortisol first. What they found was there was no difference in the low carb, normal carb, high protein, normal protein for resting cortisol levels. Now, when they separated that into short term and long term, in the short term, there was an increase in cortisol for the low carb diets, but long term, more than 3 weeks, there was no change. And that kind of makes sense because there's an adaptation process. We know there's an adaptation process to low carb diets. Now, if you're truly eating 35% of your calories from carbs, there's no adaptation going on there. But if this did include studies with lower amounts of carbs that did have an adaptation process, okay, that could explain the rise in cortisol. And again, temporary. So as your body's having, maybe some more gluconeogenesis, learning to burn fat for fuel and produce ketones, if it's a ketogenic diet, that type of transition period makes sense that you would have increased cortisol temporarily. But the important thing about cortisol is over the long run. So studies more than 3 weeks, there was no increase. Now, post-exercise, there was an increase in cortisol with a lower carb diet, especially with more than 20 minutes of exercise. Now, here's what's interesting. Does that matter? I mean, that's the big question. When you're doing a study specifically looking at one marker, the question is, does it matter clinically? If it goes up a little bit with exercise and then comes right back down for the rest of your day, is that clinically significant? I tend to say no, probably not. And why would cortisol go up? Well, maybe it's because it's helping your body create more glucose for energy uses, which is a good thing because then you're using that glucose. You're burning it in addition to hopefully burning fat from increased lipolysis. And so, that's all hypothetical theory, but I guess the question is, just because it goes up a little bit with exercise is not by definition a bad thing. And I think what's more important is maybe the area under the curve and, chronically what happens long term. So I'm a little underwhelmed by that finding, and I kind of chalk that off as to not being all that important. But now let's talk about the testosterone, because this is what got the headlines, and this is what's going to get a lot of men's attention. So in people who ate a high protein, so greater than 35% protein, and low carb, less than 35% of your calories from carbs, there was a significant decrease in total testosterone. Now notice I emphasize total testosterone. I'm going to talk about that in a second. So first, the sample size was only 26 men. All right, so pretty small sample size, low power, big confidence intervals, not the strongest level of evidence. So we got to automatically sort of take it with a little bit of skepticism. But total testosterone. So here's the thing. Again, do we care? It doesn't matter. It sounds scary. Men don't want low testosterone. But total testosterone is one blood test. There's also free testosterone. And free testosterone is sort of like the active testosterone, because there's also testosterone bound to what's called sex hormone binding globulin. Now, in clinical experience, there is a rise in sex hormone binding globulin that can happen in some people, but not in all people eating low carb diets. But the question is, what happens to the free testosterone, I think would be pretty important. And that wasn't reported. So by total testosterone going down, does it really matter? What happens to the free testosterone? Also, are there any symptoms that go along with low testosterone? Because testosterone is just a blood test, right? It's a blood test, but does it reflect what's going on with you as a person? So are you not able to increase muscle mass? Are you having problems with libido or erectile dysfunction? Are you having problems with fatigue? These are some of the symptoms that can go along with low testosterone. But if you don't have any of those symptoms, does a slightly lowered testosterone, total testosterone, with no mention of free testosterone, is that clinically relevant? No clue. And this is a problem with looking at a study that focuses just on one blood test, especially when there are other blood tests and potential symptoms that you really need to bring together to say, is this a problem? So starting with just 26 patients in the cohort, and then all these other problems, really makes you sort of question the importance and the generalizability of this finding. So does that mean we should just ignore the study? No. I mean, it's still an interesting finding. It should sort of pique our interest and keep us asking questions. But by no means is this a statement that low carb, high protein diets decrease your testosterone in a bad way and you should not eat them. No way. This study does not show that at all. Instead, it makes us say, this is interesting. Let's look into it a little bit more. So if you're eating a low carb, high protein diet, test your testosterone, test your total and your free testosterone. Reflect on if you have any symptoms of low testosterone. Those are all important things. Make sure you're maintaining your lean muscle mass. So if you want to try and counteract any potential low testosterone, there are natural ways that you can try and increase your testosterone. The biggest is losing fat mass and maintaining lean mass or gaining lean mass. Doing resistance training and eating high protein can help with muscle mass and resistance training, which can help with testosterone. Also, make sure you're eating adequate fat. Very low fat diets can lower testosterone because you sort of need fat. You need cholesterol to actually create testosterone. Make sure you're getting adequate vitamin D, preferably from sunlight, but some from supplements and if you need to. Excessive alcohol intake can lower testosterone. Recreational drugs can lower testosterone. And of course, sleep. Sleep is so important, getting an adequate amount of sleep. And also managing your chronic stress to lower cortisol levels can also help increase testosterone levels. So there are a number of things you can do in your lifestyles that you should be doing anyway to help with your testosterone levels. But I wouldn't put too much stock in this study. But something you may want to look into if you are eating a low carb, high protein diet, but make sure it's appropriate for you, your free testosterone, and if you're having any symptoms, and make sure you're doing the lifestyle habits that you can do to naturally try and maintain and increase your testosterone and lean muscle mass. All right. Hope that was helpful. It gives a little more clarity to the study. If you thought it was helpful, click the thumbs up and subscribe, and you'll get all our updates here on Diet Doctor News on YouTube. We'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.